Okay, welcome everyone to the 2Gig Technologies technical training. This technical training will be on the Go control and the installation and programming. We'll actually go over a couple of other things throughout this training course, but most of it will focus on the Go control panel and its features. For those of you that are new to this training and to this product, my name is Andrew Curtis. I'm the Director of Customer and Technical Support. I'm also the National Training Manager. And I've been with 2Gig for almost 3 years now, so it's been a good amount of time. As most of you may know, and if you don't know, this will be news to you. 2Gig has been acquired by Linear, and we are joining forces with Linear. So with that being said, we will go ahead and get started. And if you have questions, we do have a large group today. Please just type the questions into the box, and I will answer all of the questions at the end. Also, this course is accredited for CEU credits, so if you or the company you work for are interested in CEU credits, I will send out some instructions at the end so people can receive those credits. The first thing we're going to go over is some of the hardware. System capabilities, what's inside the box, what's inside the panel, the transformer, some of the basic things. As far as system capabilities goes, there are 48 wireless zones that you can program into the panel. And those are going to be, any of your peripheral devices, things like your door window contacts, door window contacts, motion detectors, smoke detectors, things like that. Then in addition to those 48 zones, you also have 2 hardwired zones. And then you have up to 8 key fob zones and up to 4 secondary keypads. Now, all of these extra zones are completely separate from the 48 zones. So if you were to program a key fob or a secondary keypad, it would not take away from one of your 48 wireless zones. By default, it's programmed to do two-way over a cell module, so either one of the GSM modules or the new CDMA modules. We also just released the 3G GSM module, so you have a couple of options there. But either way you look at it, it is programmed to do two-way over that module as a default. You do have the option of doing a POTS line. So if the customer's in an area where they just don't get signal, or if they're not interested in any of the remote features or remote services, then you could use a POTS line if you want. And there will be, actually on a separate slide here, we'll go over the phone line stuff, but there's a separate POTS module that you would plug into the panel. Then one of the big differences between this panel and other panels out there, every single panel has Z-Wave built into it. So it'll act as a Z-Wave controller. You're able to control Z-Wave devices, and we have a whole section at the very end that will go over the Z-Wave and home automation. So here's a list of all of our peripherals, and I apologize, I know it's really small and probably hard to read. But this is just, here as general information. I will, I'll be able to send this to everybody, so don't worry about trying to remember all of this. But as you can see, we have, a good variety of peripheral devices. There's thin door window contacts, there's a recessed door contact, a passive infrared motion detector, glass break detector. With the new smoke, heat, and freeze detector, you have the ability of programming it as either smoke only, heat only, freeze only, or any combination of the three. You've got your CO detector, key fobs, single button panics, TAKEOVER module, which we'll actually spend a little bit of time on. We did just recently release an HD video camera that supports 720p resolution. So you do have a good range of devices and peripherals and accessories. We also have options on the different radios. I think most people right now are using the CDMA module with Verizon just because of signal strength and coverage area. But there also is a 3G AT&T module. And then you've got your POTS module. And then with the XCVR2, the 900 megahertz transceiver, this is a receiver that comes with the TS1, which is our secondary touchscreen panel. It works both the 345 megahertz frequency and the 900 megahertz frequency. And so if you are using the secondary touchscreen panel, you would need to have one of these XCVR2 transceivers. And we'll go over that a little bit more. As far as antennas, we do have a lot of options out there, and actually most of these options are limited, and we actually don't offer them anymore. So, for example, the ANT1, ANT1X, and the ANT2X, we used to use those with our 2G GSM modules, but we don't use those anymore. Now we offer the ANT3X, which has been certified and approved for use with the 3G GSM module and the CDMA module. So if you are using either the 3G or the CDMA module, you need to make sure that you are using the ANT3X. A couple other accessories. We got some desk mount kits. So if you ever had customers that wanted to, mount their panel on the desk or on a coffee table or something like that, there is a Go Control desktop kit. There's a TS1 desktop kit, and then you've got some other accessories as well. And then the last one is just the different Z-Wave and automation devices. And again, we'll go over Z-Wave at the end, but you have a thermostat, some lamp modules, and some door locks. All right, so as far as what's in the panel, it kind of depends on which panel you're using. For the first couple years, we only had one panel, and so the layout hasn't really changed. But just recently, within the last couple of weeks, we released a second, not really second generation, but it's a revised panel that has some hardware updates to it. As we all know, over time with technology, there's updates and things change. So luckily for us, the panel is a software-based panel, and so most things can be updated via software. But there were still some hardware changes and upgrades. So this is the original panel. So if you're using a panel, the box will be labeled the CNTRL for control. So the Control 2 panel is our first generation panel, or what a lot of us would refer to it as the legacy panel. But a couple things here. You've got the third hand strap, basically just to help hold the panel on that wall mounting bracket while you're plugging wires into it and working on the panel. You have an RJ45 connector, so if you were ever using a POTS line, you would just run your phone line into an RJ31X jack and then use like a Cat5 cable or an RJ45 cord and connect your RJ31X jack to this RJ45 connector on the panel. And then you'd be able to get your line seizure and everything would be working. You've got your backup battery. It is rechargeable. It should last you 18 to 24 hours. And when it drains and the power comes back on, it'll just recharge itself. It's got your 345 megahertz receiver. Again, every panel comes with this 345 receiver. You've got your terminal block, and I know the picture is small, but if you look really carefully, you can see that the terminal block is labeled. Over on the left-hand side, you have an antenna compartment. So with the earlier versions of the antenna, there was an internal antenna that you could plug in here, and you can actually see it in this picture, this black cable or black antenna that kind of wraps around and plugs into the GSM module. So on the right-hand side, you have the pop-in style GSM module or CDMA module. And then you have an 85 decibel siren. So that is how our first generation panel is laid out. Also, technically called the Control 2 panel. When we look at the new panel, you'll notice a couple differences here. First is the name. So the second version of the panel is called the CP21. That's the panel that we offer. Or that's what it's named. Again, you have a third hand strap, but you'll notice that the RJ45 connector is missing. And it's not necessarily missing, it's just optional now. We did a comparison, and out of 970,000 panels that have been installed, less than 2% use a phone line. So that is now an optional module that can be plugged into the panel. Still, you've got your backup battery, your 345 megahertz receiver, again, is standard. And that's the module that you would swap out if you were using that 900 megahertz receiver. You got your terminal block. Again, it's labeled. You've got your GSM antenna compartment still. And then you've got the area for your CDMA module or GSM module. All right, moving on to the transformer. The transformer is a 14-volt DC, 1.7 amp transformer. So just make sure you pay attention to the polarity. You've got your positive and your negative. If you plug things in backwards, you're not going to damage the panel. It's protected pretty well. But just make sure, if you ever run into a situation where the panel won't power up, just double check or triple check your wiring. Also, the control panel draws almost all of that output, and so if you try and power multiple panels or multiple devices off of the single transformer, it may work at first, but over time you will either burn out the transformer or you'll get low battery signals. So make sure you're only using one panel per transformer. With the terminal block, terminals 1 and 2 are your power, so 1's your positive, 2's your negative. Terminals 3 and 4 are your open collector. The open collector puts out 250 milliamps at 16 volt DC. You can use this as a relay or a trigger for things as long as they're smaller than 250 milliamps. A lot of times people will use that for a little LED light so that the customer knows if their panel's armed or not. The open collector is programmable, so you can go into programming and tell the panel when to trigger that output. Terminals 5 and 6 are specified external bell output, but it only puts out 120 milliamps. So just if you're using an external bell or a smaller siren, just make sure it's something small like just one of those little piezo sirens or something, and it's under 120 milliamps. The external bell is automatically programmed to trigger on an alarm and then shut off during a two-way. So you don't have to do anything special in programming. Just make sure that it meets the power requirements. If you are using a bigger horn or something, you'll just need to make sure you have a separate power supply for it. And then terminals 7 and 8 are your hardwired zones. So going back to the beginning, I was saying that we had 48 wireless zones and then 2 hardwired zones. This is where the 2 hardwired zones get plugged in at. So you have your positive or your high wires that would plug into terminal 7 and 8, and then your grounds or your commons would plug into terminal number 3. All right, we're going to go through the different cell modules real quick. This is our original 2G module. Some of you may be using these still. Some of you may not be. That's totally fine. But a couple of things, you got an antenna port over on the right-hand side. With the antenna, you'll just want to make sure that it snaps on all the way. You should kind of feel it click on there. So just make sure that the antenna is on there all the way. Otherwise, you'll have issues with your signal strength. You've got your grounding screws, so make sure you're using those. And then when you are registering your radio with alarm.com, you'll need to use this IMEI number. That's the radio serial number. It looks like a phone number. It's the 800 number here at the end. So if you have any questions about how to register one of the cell modules, you can give us a call, and we can help you with that. All right, the new 3G module, on the top side, you have the antenna port still. You've got your grounding screws or your mounting screws still. You have your IMEI number. Again, it's the last 10 digits, so when you look at this number, it looks kind of funny, but you just take the last 10 digits. So again, it's an 800 number. You also have a sticker that has the manufacturing serial number, which really isn't that important to you guys, unless we're doing some troubleshooting with tech support, and we might ask for that number. And then the last one is the little panel connector. So you've got the black panel connector that it'll seed onto the panel with. So that's the 3G module. And then the CDMA module, again, you've got the antenna port, you've got your grounding screws, And then instead of an IMEI number, it's an ADC number. And I don't know why the name is changed or different, but it's still a 10-digit number that you'll use to register. So on this one, it's a 951 number. So those are the 3 different cellular radios that we have now, the 2G, 3G, and CDMA. Now if you're using the TS1, you do need to make sure that you have this XCVR2 installed. It's a 900 megahertz transceiver that does both 900 megahertz frequency and the 345 megahertz frequency. And when you get the TS1, there's 2 different ways you can get the TS1. You can either get the TS1 by itself, or you can get it in a kit, the TS1-E kit, and it'll have the TS1 and this transceiver module. So you just need to make sure that before you even power up the panel or do anything, you probably should just pull out the module real quick, plug in the new module, this 900 megahertz module. And I would do that before I even power up the panel. Just make sure that you don't do it with the panel powered up. That way, we don't want to cause any issues with the panel. But just do that before you panel the power up or power the panel up, and you should be good to go. All right. So we're going to move into programming now, and you have the installer toolbox, and inside of the installer toolbox, there's system configuration, and that's where you do all of your programming. There's also a radio status option, a system restore, a walk test, and a disable sounder. And we'll go over all of those, but we're going to start with system configuration and how to get into the installer toolbox. There's actually 2 different ways that you can get into the installer toolbox. There's a shortcut, which in the bottom right corner, you have a little logo, and it could be the Go Control logo, or it could be your own company's logo. But whatever that logo is, you press that button and it'll ask you for a code. And at that point, you would just type in your installer code, and it'll take you into the installer toolbox. The normal way is through the home screen. You're going to press Security, then you will press Menu, and then you'll press Toolbox. And this is actually the user menu, so the homeowner has access to this. And they can come in here and they can edit their master code, they can add secondary user codes, they can edit their chime settings, their brightness and volume. If they scroll through, they have an installer toolbox option. When they press the installer toolbox button, it will ask them for the installer code. And by default, the installer code is 1561. So when you pull that panel out of the box for the first time, this is the code that you'll use. And it's the code that you will want to change. And I'll show you where to change it in programming. Again, the other option is to press the logo in the lower right corner, which would take you straight to the installer code screen. Once you're in the installer toolbox, these are all your different options, and we're going to start with system configuration and go through, and we're going to program a zone real quick. Now, system configuration is broken down into a series of questions. The first 4 questions make up what most would consider zone programming. So for all of you that are familiar with programming a Demco or Honeywell equipment, you have your zone programming and field programming. This is how it's kind of broken down. The first 4 questions would be the equivalent of your zone programming. So zone 1, or question 1 is your wireless zones. Question 2 is your hardwired zones. Question 3 are your key fobs. And then question 4 are your wireless keypads. Each of those first 4 questions has multiple zones, and each of those zones has a series of settings or sub-questions for that zone. So let's say, for example, within question number 1, we have zone number 1, and within zone number 1, we have settings like zone type, serial number, loop number, voice descriptor, chime settings. So there's a couple of options within that zone. Questions 5 through 88 are your different field settings or system settings. And the easy way to navigate is by pressing the Go To button followed by the 2-digit question number. So let's say, for example, I wanted to go change my installer code. Question 43 is my installer code, so I could just press Go To 43, and then it would let me type in a new 4-digit installer code. But once you're on the zone that you want to program, then you can just move within that zone. Also, if you ever are lost or not quite sure where you're at in programming, the best thing to do is just look at the screen, and it'll tell you. In the top left corner in the dark blue box, it says Q1 select RF sensor number, and then 01 to 48 in parentheses. So this tells us that we're on question number 1. And then in the white box, it has a 01 in parentheses. That's our zone number. So right there, we know we're on question number 1, and we're on zone number 1. If we were on question number 43, up in the dark blue box, it would say Q43. So if you're ever lost or not sure, just look and it'll tell you. And at any point, you can always just press the Go To button followed by a 2-digit number. So if you're ever worried, just press Go To and then 01, and it'll just take you to question 1, and then you can make whatever changes you need to. You can use the up and down arrows to move back and forth between sub-questions. And then for each of those sub-questions, you could use the left or right arrows to scroll through those options. And then, same thing with questions 5 through 88. You just use the up and down arrows to move back and forth between questions. And then the left and right arrows, to scroll through enabled or disabled or whatever those options are. Each question is going to be a little bit different. Some of the questions, for example, the one that's on this screen right now, question number 5, you wouldn't necessarily use the left or right arrows to scroll through the options because it's a time setting. So you would just type in a time amount, so 45 seconds or 60 seconds or something like that. Okay, so once we're on question number 1, it'll always start us off on zone number 1, and you can use the left or right arrows to scroll through the zone. So if we hit the right arrow, it would take us to zone 2. If we hit the right arrow again, it would take us to zone 3. But we're going to program zone number 1. So go ahead and just hit the down arrow, and it'll take us inside of that zone. So now we're in zone 1, and our first sub-question, or our first setting, is our zone type or sensor type. And basically the sensor type is just how the panel responds to a signal from the sensor. So if you go, you can scroll with the left or right arrows and select what type of zone number or zone type you want. If you have the installation and programming guide, you can look on, I believe it's page 17, there is a list of sensor types. So you can look through them. Each sensor type has a 2-digit number. So, if it was a door, you could just set it as a 0-1. If it was a window, you could set it as a 0-3. If it was a motion detector, a 0-4. So it just kind of depends on what type of sensor it is. But this is what tells the panel, how to respond to that signal. Do I give it an entry delay, or do I set it off instantly? Once you have your sensor type selected, go ahead and hit the down arrow. And before we move on real quick, we always get asked, what's the difference between an exit entry 1 and an exit entry 2? The difference is the amount of time on your entry delay. So you'll always, for your exit delay timer, your exit delay timer is always going to be set to 60 seconds by default. You can change that if you want, but by default it's 60 seconds. Your entry delay, if you are doing an entry 1, it's set at 30 seconds, and if you're doing an entry 2, it's set at 45 seconds. And those are also numbers that you can change. So for example, if the homeowner comes in their front door more often than they do the garage door, and it's closer to the panel, you can give them less time to disarm their panel because it's closer to the panel. So my entry 1 could be 30 seconds. But let's say entry 2 is their garage door, and I'm coming home from the grocery store. I got to set the groceries on the kitchen counter and then walk over to the panel on the other side of the house. So I could set my entry 2 at 2 minutes. I believe 2 minutes is the maximum. So it just lets you set different timers. Once you have that set, go ahead and hit the down arrow. Your next sub-question is your equipment code. And the equipment code is just a 4-digit model number assigned to that specific sensor. So you can look on the list that's in the programming guide, or you can use the left and right arrows and scroll through. But each one has a 4-digit number assigned to it, and so just find the piece of equipment you're using and make sure that it selects that specific piece of equipment. Next is your serial number. There's 2 different ways you can program your serial number. You can either just manually type it in, or you can do the auto entry mode. For the auto entry mode, you'll press Shift and then Learn, and then you can go trigger that sensor, and it'll copy and paste the serial number onto the panel. The next sub-question is your equipment age. The equipment age doesn't really have any effect on the zone or whether or not it works. It's just there to let people know if it's a new piece of equipment or an existing piece of equipment. The next sub-question is your loop number. And the loop number, for those of you that are familiar with Ademco or Honeywell equipment, you'll know what a loop number is. Those of you that have used GE or some of the other ones, you may not know what the loop numbers are, but by default, all of the devices are a loop 1. There's only 2 devices that will ever be different. The DW10, the thin door window contact, has 2 options. It can either be a loop 1 if you have the external hardwired input lead. That would be your loop 1. A loop 2 would be if you're just using the sensor with a magnet next to it. Most people just set it up as a loop 2, but depending on how you're installing the contact, you need to make sure that you change the loop number. Otherwise, you'll run into situations where it'll trigger on the panel the first time, but then it'll still show that that specific door is open still. So if that's ever the case, just double check your loop number. The other device that will ever be different is the new smoke detector. The SMKT3 it's a smoke, heat, and freeze detector. And so you can program 3 separate zones. Loop 1 is a smoke, loop 2 is a heat, and loop 3 is a freeze. So you would use the same serial number, but you would just change the loop number depending on what feature you wanted. Next is your dialer delay. The dialer delay is just a 30-second abort window. So, if you come in the front door, instead of sending an alarm, it would give you a 30-second window to disarm the panel, and instead of sending an alarm, it'll send a cancellation, or maybe it's a window that gets opened or something. So it'll give you a 30-second abort window to send a cancellation instead of an alarm. That is a feature that you can disable it if you want to, based off the zone that you're working with. Next is your voice descriptor. The voice descriptor is what the panel enunciates during a chime, and it also uploads it to alarm.com. In the programming guide on page 19, there's a vocabulary table of words, and each of those words is assigned a 3-digit number. And so what you'll do is, for each word, you will press the insert button followed by the 3-digit number. So let's say, for example, we want to program front door. For those of you right now that have the vocabulary table with you, look on the list, and you'll see it's alphabetical. So go look and find front. It's 098. So you'll press insert followed by 098, and then for door, you'll press insert, 058. So for each word, you'll press insert followed by that 3-digit number. And you can have up to 5 words. So you can be pretty detailed in that zone descriptor. The next sub-question is whether or not that central reports to a central station. By default, it's enabled, so you can just hit the down arrow and move on to your next sub-question, which is whether or not that sensor is supervised. With the supervisory signals, the panel sends out supervisory signals every 70 minutes, and it'll check for proximity, battery. If it misses a certain number of pings or check-ins consecutively, it will produce a loss of supervision. So if you want that sensor to be supervised, you can leave it enabled. If it's a portable panic pendant, something that maybe grandma has, and she walks off down the street to the grocery store, we don't necessarily want it to go into a loss of supervision. You can disable that feature if you want. If you want to leave it enabled, you can. That's totally up to you guys. And the last one's the chime settings. The homeowner actually has access to this from the user menu, so they can change the chime on their own. But for testing, you're going to want to be able to test everything and make sure it's working. So I would just go ahead and enable it. You have 13 different chime settings, so just pick one. Most people pick number 2, the voice with the chime, and then that is pretty much it for your zone. So at the end of each zone, no matter what it is, you'll have a summary screen. If you look at the summary screen, it'll show you all of the different settings that we just programmed. So your zone type, equipment code, serial number, voice descriptor. If you notice that something's wrong, you can press Edit Current, and it'll take you back to the beginning of that zone, and then you can just scroll through and make whatever changes you need to. If everything looks good, you can press Edit Next, and it'll take you to the beginning of your next zone. And then if you're done with that zone, or if you're done with all of your zones, you can press Skip, and it'll take you to the next question. Typically, question number 2 would be next, which is our wired zones. But we're actually going to skip over that and go to question number 4. Programming under question 2, when you program hardwired zones, the programming is almost identical to programming a wireless zone. The only difference is instead of asking for a serial number, it asks you if it's normally open, normally closed, or defined resistor. The key thing to remember for your hardwired zones is you cannot use smoke detectors or carbon monoxide detectors. So no life safety devices. The panel is not rated for that. It's not a fire system or smoke system. It's a security system. So we do have UL-listed wireless smoke detectors. So if they are interested in adding one of those, it's designed to be supplemental, not a replacement. Question number 4 is our secondary keypad. So we're going to go through programming a keypad so you guys can see how easy these are. And there's actually 2 different types of keypads, so that's why I wanted to go over these ones. The first sub-question for your keypad is whether or not that zone is being used. So you need to make sure that you change this so that it says used. And then that way the control panel knows that it's looking for a signal from that keypad. The next one is your equipment code. And with the equipment code, there's 2 different types of equipment codes for your keypads. There's our original keypad is the pad 1. It's just a numeric button keypad. It's a 345 megahertz device that is assigned a 7-digit serial number like everything else. And then you have the new TS1, which is the wireless touchscreen. It's a 900 megahertz device with no serial number. So the 2 devices get paired differently to the panel. So if you pick the pad 1, or if you're using the pad 1, it will ask you for a serial number, and you can just go in and you can type in the serial number, or you can do the auto entry mode and press a button on the keypad, and it will put the serial number in there. If you are using the TS1, then on the control panel, you'll have a button that says Learn, and then on the TS1, there will be a button that says Pair with Panel. And you'll press both of those buttons, and it'll go through a pairing process where it shares the network ID, they sync together, and then it'll either tell you that it was successful or that it failed. So once you press the OK button, if it was successful, it'll give you a message that says the security system is temporary, not operational. That screen just means that you're in programming. So once you exit programming, your TS1 will clear that off the screen, and it'll go back into normal user mode. And just like everything else, you've got a summary screen that you can either edit that zone that you're on or the keypad that you're on, or you can edit next. You can have up to 4 of these keypads. If you hit skip, it'll take you into your field settings. And there's a couple of questions that are pretty common, and so we'll go over some of these ones real quick. If you're ever using a phone line, you need to make sure that you enable your dialer. So question number 8 is your dialer. Question 11 is your central station phone number. And question 12 is your central station account number. So for these 3 questions, 8, 11, and 12, you need to make sure you enable those if you're using a phone line. Question 63 is for if you're doing a phone line, but you're using a cell radio as a backup. This one will look for a failed phone line, and then if the phone line fails, it'll send a signal through the GSM, letting the central station know that your phone line has failed. Question 43 is your installer code. So again, this is where you would go and you would type in a new 4-digit installer code. Question 44 is your your programming lockout feature. This is a feature that's provided to prevent takeovers. And basically what happens is when you exit system configuration for the first time, it'll start a 48-hour timer. And depending on what you have selected for question 44, it will affect what happens to the panel at the end of that 48 hours. By default, it's set as a 0, so the panel is unlocked, and you can default the panel, or you could get into programming. If you change it to either a 1 or a 2, it will lock the access to programming or the installer toolbox, and it'll either lock all of the access to it, or it'll give you access as far as being able to view certain things, but you wouldn't be able to change the important things like your central station information. So just be careful with that one. It is something that you can use, but just be careful with it. Once the panel is locked, the only way to unlock it is remotely through alarm.com and through their AirFX remote toolkit. So you can go in and you can, if you have access to that panel in that account, you can upload the panel and, access programming that way. Question 45 is basically the, how you can default the panel, or actually what happens when you default the panel, or if you can default the panel at all. So, if you wanted to disable the defaulting ability, then you could use question 45. Question 42 is for remote phone control. Nobody uses this because most everybody has alarm.com, but for those that don't use alarm.com, they do have the ability of dialing the panel and controlling the panel that way. One of the features that we do get asked a lot about is bypassing zones. Question 72 allows you to enable a quick bypass. Typically, you have to type in the master code every time you want to bypass a zone. If that's something that the customer doesn't want to do, they just want to be able to click on the button to bypass it, you can enable the quick bypass feature, which is question 72. And then question 79 is your Z-Wave features. And we'll go over Z-Wave. Going back to the installer toolbox, we have a radio status button. Radio status will show us the signal strength of our cellular radio. It'll show us the serial number, the registration status, a couple other important things. Restore defaults allows us to go in and we can control what we default. If we want to default just our zones, just our system settings, or everything, we could check or uncheck one of those boxes. The walk test is just a local test. So it's important to remember that it will not send a signal to your central station. It does list everything. The homeowner actually has access to this from the user toolbox. And so they can go through and they can do a manual test. It'll show them the signal strength of the sensor, and it'll turn green if it's working. So that's the log test. And then the last one is disable sounder. This is a feature that I really like. I know maybe not all of us, but most of us have been in a situation where we've been in a house before where the customers had kids that are sleeping, and so we've, tried to be nice and we unplugged the siren because we don't want to wake the kids up, and then we've left and forgotten to plug it back in. So this allows you to electronically disable the siren for 30 minutes, and then at the end of that 30 minutes, it'll just it'll automatically re-enable itself. So that's a really nice feature, and that way you're not forgetting to plug anything in or anything like that. One of the devices we get asked a lot about is the TAKEOVER module. And for those of you that don't know what the TAKEOVER module is, basically it allows you to go into a house with a hardwired system or an existing wired system, and you can take those hardwired zones and convert them into wireless zones. So it's just a translator. Each of these modules can hold 8 zones, and each of those 8 zones is an individual zone that gets programmed on the panel. Again, you can have up to 48 wireless zones on the panel. So in theory, you can stack up to 6 TAKEOVER modules to get 48 zones. You would just need to make sure that you've got enough power supply coming from either your existing panel or a separate power supply, that's the way you go. It'll do everything except for smoke detectors and CO, so again, no life safety devices. A quick wiring layout. You've got a G port, so all of your common grounds would plug into the G port. You have a 12-volt DC positive, and that's either going to come from your auxiliary output on your existing panel or your power supply. And then you have terminals 1 through 8, which are your actual high wires or your zones. And that can be with or without resistors, so either way. This is one option as far as wiring goes. This example is, in this example, it's a Vista 15 board. But it's important to know there's a specific order that things need to happen. And if they're not done in a specific order, you will get a low battery signal every time. And so just make sure you follow these 4 steps. First, we want to disconnect all of our power. So unplug the AC power, unplug your backup battery, and then we're going to wire up our TAKEOVER module. So we're going to take all of our high wires, and we're going to plug our high wires into the TAKEOVER module. We are going to plug in our backup battery, and then we're going to plug in our power to our TAKEOVER module. Now, you can do one of 2 things with your low wires. You can either leave your low wires on the existing board where they're at, or you can bundle all of them together and plug them into the TAKEOVER module on the G port. And then the last thing is plug your AC power back in. So that's one way you can do a TAKEOVER module. The other way is just without using this existing board, just treat it like it's an electronics power supply or some type of a power supply. You'd be pulling your power from there. When you program the zones, they get programmed under your wireless zones. Each one will be different. Your terminal number 1 might be your front door. Terminal number 2 might be a window. Terminal 3 might be a motion detector. So your zone type is going to change depending on what the actual contact is. For your equipment code, there's a specific equipment code for the TAKEOVER module, so you'll want to make sure that you use that specific equipment code. And then the tricky part is the serial number. The serial number that's printed on the module ends with a 1. That is the serial number for terminal number 1. And then when you program terminals 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, you would use the same serial number, but you change the last digit. So if I'm on terminal number 3, instead of it ending in a 1, it ends in a 3. then your loop number will always be a loop 1, and then your voice descriptor would change for each zone. So again, each of those 8 terminal slots becomes a separate individual zone in programming. Okay, the next 10 or 15 minutes we're going to go over Z-Wave, and then I'll try and answer as many questions as possible. And some of you may be pretty familiar with what Z-Wave is, so I apologize, this will probably be pretty basic information. If you guys do have more questions about Z-Wave, you can always, I'll give you my contact information at the end. But Z-Wave, let me go back to here real quick. We have 2 partners with Z-Wave right now. We've got Alarm.com that does all the remote access and the back-end service functionality, and then Z-Wave itself. And Z-Wave is a technology that is owned by a company called Sigma. It is a wireless network that basically lets different devices talk to each other. And it's designed to be simple. It's going to be devices like lights, locks, and thermostats. But those devices will all talk to each other. They can create a mesh network. And Z-Wave itself is relatively simple to use. It's easy to add a device into your network or remove a device from your network. It's modular, so you're able to add devices over time. And we've seen this with some people where their customers are new to this type of a security system, and so maybe they won't start off with anything, but then they're like, oh, you know what, I want to turn my lights on and off. And then they're like, oh, well, now I want to be able to control my thermostat. When I leave work, I want my home to be warmer by the time I get home, or something like that. And so they'll build over time. Z-Wave uses it's a 908 megahertz frequency in North America. It uses a different frequency in Europe and other countries, but in North America it uses 908 megahertz frequency. With the mesh network, pretty much what happens is when you learn the device into your network, it goes into a routing table, and that table basically keeps track of which devices can talk to which devices. The whole purpose with Z-Wave is you want to be able to set up a mesh network so that those devices can talk to each other, not necessarily just talking straight to the panel. And there will be times where they have to talk to each other for range and for other things. So with those routing tables, you can kind of see in this diagram, you've got a control panel and a thermostat, and the control panel can talk to a lamp module, which can talk to a lamp module, which can then talk to the thermostat. But it can also be set up where that thermostat, maybe it can talk to both of the lamp modules, not just the one. With the new control panel, going back to, we had the Control 2 panel, and now we have the new CP21 panel. One of the upgrade features on that CP21 panel is a new Z-Wave firmware. And so there are some benefits to that as far as range and performance, dynamic routing tables, and some other things. So ultimately, there are a lot of companies that make Z-Wave devices. Each one is going to perform a little bit differently. Each one's going to have, different instructions as far as how to be included or removed from a network. So you have lots of options out there. But going back to, Z-Wave and being in the home, most Z-Wave devices have a line of sight range of 30 to 40 feet. With the new Z-Wave firmware, it might be a little bit longer, but It's pretty similar to Bluetooth where there's a certain range. So let's say, for example, you have your control panel on one side of the house and your thermostat on the other side of the house. Well, the control panel is going to send out a signal and looking for devices, and the thermostat is going to send out a signal looking for a controller. And the two signals are going to miss. There's going to be a gap in the middle. So what you can do is you can use one of these lamp modules, and the lamp module will talk to the panel, but the lamp module also acts as a repeater. And so it'll beam or send out that Z-wave signal and broadcast it to other devices. And so the thermostat will pick up on that signal that the lamp module is sending out, and it'll connect to the lamp module, and then it'll see that the lamp module is connected to the control panel. And so it sets up this little network. So the more devices you have in your network, the more reliable that network becomes. I mean, what happens if that lamp module gets unplugged or something happens to it and it fails? That link in the chain is missing again, and so the thermostat would have issues. So the more devices you have, the more of a bubble and the more of a mesh network you can create. Going into programming, you've got question 79, which is your Z-Wave feature. By default, it's a 1, so it'll give the customer a message that says the home services feature is not currently activated. To activate home services, please call your security provider. Well, you guys are the security provider, so you're going to want to change this to either a 2 or a 3. And the easy way to know what to change it to is just ask yourself the question, are they using alarm.com? Are they looking for remote access? If the answer is yes, then they need to set question 79 as a 3. If they're not using any remote access, then they would set question 79 as a 2. Question 80 is your switches, and a switch is going to be anything that's on or off, light switch, lamp module, anything like that. Question 81 is your thermostats, and question 82 are your door locks. So your Z-Wave is broken down into 3 different device classes, so switches, thermostats, door locks. And also on one of the more recent firmware updates we released the ability for Z-Wave sirens. And so you can learn a Z-Wave siren into your network, and it's automatically, it gets recognized as a siren, and then the panel knows to trigger the siren on an alarm and then shut it off during a 2-way. So to add a device into your network or remove a device, you'll press Services, and then in the bottom right corner you have Toolbox. It's going to ask you for your installer code. And then with your Z-Wave Toolbox, it's pretty simple. It's just add or remove. So go ahead and press Add. Now, when you press the Add button, the panel goes into a pairing mode, just like your phone would when you're trying to pair it with a Bluetooth device. So the panel is going to start looking for devices. And then, depending on the device that you have, you'll press some type of a button. So you'll want to make sure you read the instructions that come with that device, but these are the 2 more common ones. You've got the lamp module, so if you press the lamp module, you might need to double-click the button, but you'll use that button, and then if you're using a door lock or a quick-set door lock, they also have a specific button that you need to press. With Yale and Schlage, there's a numeric combination you got to type in on the lock, but the concept and the principle is the same. You put the panel in pairing mode, and then you take your device, make sure it's plugged in or powered up, and then you put that device into inclusion mode as well. And then on the panel, it's going to show that it discovered a device. it'll say querying device information. It just means it's uploading all the information. It's sending out different packets, and it's waiting for those acknowledgments to come back. Once it's uploaded all the information, it'll tell you what type of device it is, and it'll also tell you who the manufacturer of that device is, and then the node number. And the node number is basically just the position in the routing table. When you remove a device, it's pretty much the same thing. You'll just click Remove Devices, and then you'll click the button, and it'll tell you that a device has been removed from the network. Once the device has been added to your network, you can go in and rename it. So let's say, for example, we have a couple of light switches, and we want to specify where those are located. So go ahead and click Switches, and then it'll list all of our different light switches that we've learned in. We can go ahead and select the specific light switch we want. And then in the bottom right corner, we have the Rename button. So we can go ahead and rename that and say, if it's in the living room or in the hallway, in the bedroom, the kitchen, upstairs, wherever that light switch is at. You can also rename your thermostats and your door locks, and the process is the same. Now, as far as automation goes, there's two different ways you can do your automation. You can either do it locally on the panel, or you can do it remotely through alarm.com. And locally, it'll give you the option to do scenes and rules. And a scene is what happens, and a rule is when it happens. You have to create the scene first. So we'll go ahead and click Add Scenes, and we're going to label it. So lights on or lights off, pretty much whatever we want to have happen. Some of the popular ones are goodbye and welcome home. But we can go in, and then now we can add a specific action. We can say, we can pick a light switch and tell it to turn on. We can pick our thermostat and tell it to set to a certain temperature, and we can pick our door lock and tell it to lock or unlock. So we pick the devices that we want, tell the device what to do, and then that's our scene. And we can create multiple scenes. So, and then you can either run those scenes locally here, or you can create a rule that tells the panel when to run the scene for you. So you can go in and click Rules, and the rules are event-based. So when the system is armed in the away mode, run my goodbye scene. And then at that point, that's how the panel knows to lock my door, turn off my lights, and lower my thermostat. And then you can create another rule that says, when my system is disarmed, run my welcome home scene, and that's how it knows to unlock the door, raise the thermostat, and then turn my lights on. So that's how you do it locally on the panel. If you're using alarm.com, you're able to go in and you can set all this up remotely, and that way the customer has the functionality and the ability to do that either through the internet on their computer, or they can control those devices with their cell phone. When you're creating a rule on alarm.com, you'll click on the Empower tab, and then there will be a rules section. And those rules are event triggered, but they also have separate details. So you can pick, alarms, arming, disarming, sensor activity. So, like for example, I have a rule set up at my house right now where if I walk down the stairs at night and set off my motion detector, it'll turn my living room lamp on. That way I can see. You can also set up scheduled automation, and this is what I did with my Christmas lights. I set it up so that at sunset it turned on my Christmas lights, and then at 11 p.m. it turned my Christmas lights off. So you can do, you can be a little bit more creative, or the homeowner can be a little bit more creative with the rules on alarm.com. The last thing real quick I want to just go over is the lamp module, the thermostat. And the new thermostat that we have is the CT100, and there are a couple of upgraded features from our original CT30. The CT100 has an increased battery life, so you're looking at 18 to 24 month battery life. It has an increased Z-wave range. It still has a touchscreen interface, and it can either be battery powered or AC powered. So just depending on your HVAC system. A couple of things you want to first off make sure that the customer's existing system works, and then we want to make sure that we shut everything off. That way we're not playing with any live wires. But then the real important thing is just to make sure that you label everything. There's not a specific color code to those wires. So just because it's a red wire doesn't mean it gets plugged into R. Or just because it's a blue wire doesn't mean it gets plugged into B. So just make sure you label those based off of the existing thermostat. And then you can unplug those and then plug those into the new thermostat. The new thermostat does come with a wire diagram. If you do have questions, we do have an HVAC rep here at 2GIG, and he can help with all the wire conversions and different things like that. Once the thermostat's powered up, you can add it into your Z-Wave network. And with the thermostat, it's a two-step process. So you're going to go in, you'll click Add Devices, and then on the right-hand side you have a menu button, and on the left-hand side you'll have a little mate button next to a radio tower. So you're going to click Add Devices, and then Menu, and then the mate button twice. And it'll put you into that process of discovering the device, uploading all the information. Also, you'll notice with Z-Wave devices, those devices are either going to be high power inclusion devices or low power inclusion devices. The high power inclusion devices are going to be powered devices, so either light switches or lamp modules, or a thermostat that is running in AC mode. Those devices will query and upload the information relatively quickly, probably looking around 5 seconds or so. The low power inclusion devices, door locks, or battery powered thermostats, anything battery powered, will take up to a minute, maybe even a little bit longer. Specifically the door locks, because they need to pass an encryption key, so the door locks need to be within a foot or two of the panel for that encryption key. But you'll notice a big difference in the querying and uploading information time. Also, going back to being able to repeat signals, the high power inclusion devices, those AC devices, lamp modules, light switches, thermostats, those are the devices that will act as repeaters. It has to be a high power inclusion device for it to be a repeater. So with your thermostat, because it can be in both modes, or it can be in one of two modes, you need to make sure that you learn the thermostat into your Z-Wave network with it only running on AC mode or AC power. And then once it's part of your network, then you can plug the batteries into it. So that's just kind of a tip on the thermostat. Here's all of our contact information. Please, give us a call if you guys ever have any questions. Our phone number is 855-2GIG-TECH. Hopefully that's easy to remember. It's 855-244-4832. You can also email us at techsupport@2gig.com. We are open Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Mountain Time. So just keep that in mind depending on what time zone you're in. And then on Saturdays, we're open 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Mountain Time. I did put Alarm.com's contact information and radio thermostats contact information. But again, keep in mind if you have questions about HVAC systems and thermostats, you can always give us a call. And then here's my contact information. So you guys are more than welcome to give me a call or shoot me an email. Probably email is easier. If I'm not at my desk or if I'm not in the office, I can always get email on my phone. So please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. Now, if you guys are interested in CEU credits, I need you to email me and just let me know. I will be sending out I'll send out an email when we're done here that will have information that I need to process those CEU credits, and I'll also send out a copy of the presentation. So I just want to thank you guys for getting on. You guys are more than welcome to leave. But again, thank you, and again, please let us know if you need anything.